We've decided to not head straight home, but take a detour through the Oostvaardersplassen, because yesterday a possible semi-palmated sandpiper has been found here. It looks good on GIS, but no webbing between the feet has been seen or photographed yet. And a semi-palmated sandpiper should have at least some webbing between the outer toes. And also some other characters of the bird maybe point towards Little Stint. But it's an interesting bird nonetheless, so we decided to head there, and hopefully we can get some good shots of the bird and identify it as a semi-palmated sandpiper, which it hopefully is.
Before we start this video, it's quite a story, but I don't have enough footage to fill the entire video, so every now and then you might see a clip repeated, or something from the archive, which of course will be marked on screen. And one last note, for the whole story, it really is important to watch until the very end, because there's always that extra twist. The story actually begins halfway through the next episode. On the afternoon of Thursday, September 11th, I received a forwarded message in my personal WhatsApp group with friends, where we share anything related to nature. It said that a sandpiper has been spotted in the Oostvaardersplassen. The forwarded message came from the Flevoland app group with the text, "What do you think? Semi-palmated sandpiper?" Via Arjan Dwaashuis in the Oostvaardersplassen. He's not sure and is asking for help. To what extent this was Arjan's original message, I don't really know. Attached was a screenshot of 3 photos showing the sandpiper. Knowing that WhatsApp already lowers photo quality, and this was a screenshot on top of that, meant there weren't many details visible. Still, I looked at it and replied, I lean towards Little Stint. The bird doesn't look front heavy, it seems to lack head streaking and therefore no clear cap, no long hind toe is visible, and the flanks look very clean. But alright, the flank streaking could easily be lost at this image quality. Then I sent an older video. Footage of the semi-palmated sandpiper I had found myself on Vlieland in September 2021, pointing out its front heavy jizz and the striking dark cap. Later I received more photos, this time showing a very gold-toned, almost necklace bird, with striking black feather centers on the summer plumage mantle feathers. Suddenly there also seemed to be a dark cap and a rather short rear end, meaning that behind the legs there wasn't much bulk visible, and the wingtips didn't appear to reach the tail. Along with that came a note from Arjan saying he was now fairly confident about the identification, that the first photos had given a misleading picture. My reaction was that these photos indeed gave a completely different impression, but I was also aware that with photos shared over WhatsApp there's really not much more we can do, so I left it at that. The next day it was time for the first real sea watching day. The wind was southwest, not the most ideal, you prefer northwest, but for the video year list we have to take every chance we get. So we had chosen the watch point at Egmond. Maybe not the best spot in the country, but you can practically park your car right at the watch point and sit comfortably out of the wind. What we eventually saw there we'll discuss in the next video, but for now the important thing was the news that the supposed semi-palmated sandpiper was still present near the bird height, the great-legged goose, so we decided to drive home through Flevoland. When we arrived at the height it was packed with people, and we heard that the bird had just been seen but had flown off. Something that the flock of sandpipers it was with seemed to do rather often. Despite the crowd in the height, the wide viewing slits still gave enough opportunities to scan the patches of mudflat in the back. Every now and then there was some commotion in the height, for example when a white-tailed eagle sat down on a post, only to be chased off moments later by another eagle. A couple of peregrines were also seen, but I decided to focus only on the waders. With the converter attached and using digital zoom, I managed to check the birds one by one through the camera. I also decided to film small groups of waders every now and then. What struck me was that we simply couldn't relocate the presumed semi-palmated sandpiper, even though we kept seeing flocks of waders in which the bird should have been. After 2.5 hours in the height, it was really time to go home.
Sadly we searched for more than 2 hours for the birds, but we didn't see it. We were about 5 minutes too late. Sadly, And then there were some groups of sandpipers and plovers in the area, but they were constantly flushed by white-tailed eagles and peregrine falcons, so that didn't make things any easier. Also, the hide was very crowded, so a couple of times some heads came in the way or people bumped into my tripod. So it was a pretty frustrating experience with no bird after all. Well, that's birding sometimes.
That Saturday, many others went to the same hide, and the bird was reported frequently. It quickly became clear how tricky this all was, because among the many photos that were uploaded with the sightings, there were also several that showed completely different birds, clearly little stints. That evening, sitting behind my laptop, I went through my own footage, and suddenly I noticed that I had actually filmed the bird. The distinctive mantle feathers could be seen quite well. However, once again, I saw a bird that didn't match my search image of a semi-palmated sandpiper. That can mean two things. Either this was not a semi-palmated sandpiper, or my search image simply wasn't broad enough due to the lack of experience with the species. What struck me about this bird was the fairly buffy neck and nape. I turned to Arjan himself and sent him some clips, asking whether this really was the bird in question. According to Arjan, it was indeed the same bird. In the end, we attributed the buffy color on the neck and nape to the strong sunlight shining in from the left at the moment of filming. We also talked about the bird's mold, which made it individually recognizable. By now, many people had seen this bird, and apart from a few critical notes, there was consensus about the identification. Some even claimed they had seen the small webbing between the outer toes, with a good scope. Still, it nagged at me that I hadn't consciously seen the bird that Friday, and honestly, I wanted to go back one more time, preferably in the morning, when the sun would be nicely at your back. The following Sunday morning, several things came together. My son has had trouble with his ears for a long time, so he often wakes up early and doesn't want to go back to sleep. By now, his adenoids has been removed and he has ear tubes placed. That Sunday morning, he was awake again before 6, so I decided to grab my gear and head to the hide, the grey-legged goose, with him. The whole drive there, not a single report of the bird came in, so I feared it might be gone. But that fear turned out to be unnecessary, because when I arrived, the bird had just been seen again. I also ran into Arjan, who was leading an excursion for a group of young birders. We greeted each other, and I aimed my camera at the now much larger group of waders than on Friday. It wasn't hard to pick out the bird in question, based on the distinctive mantle feathers. I also filmed a few little stints at the same distance for comparison, while my son had the greatest fun playing with stones, twigs and leaves in the hide's hallway, and every bird that walked in was greeted by him. At home, reviewing the footage on my laptop, I noticed in a few frames something that strongly looked like webbing between the outer toes. I was also able to assess the bird's winter coverts more carefully, grey with a black shaft streak. In the Handbook of European Birds, Volume 1, it's beautifully shown in photos where the difference lies. The winter feathers of the semi-palmated sandpiper are plain grey with a thin shaft streak, whereas in Little Stint a dark shadow flows out from the shaft streak. Now for me personally, it's sometimes difficult to judge whether a covert is new or not, but when I compared the feathers of the presumed semi-palmated sandpiper with the illustrations in the book, it didn't look too far off. Still, I did notice the warm edges on the tertials, and I wondered if I had ever seen that in photos of semi-palmated sandpipers before. But alright, with the webbing, it should be good. I got back in touch with Arjan, pointing him to the still frames I had made. For comparison, I also included the still of the toes of a little stint. His reply was that he too had taken better digiscoped shots, in which you could see a kind of clubfoot, which at a distance can look a bit like webbing. A few days later, Arjan was back in the hide. The bird was now much closer, and on one photo, where it stretched its leg, it became clear. The bird had no webbing between the outer toes, so it was a little stint after all. But how could this happen, that so many people were fooled? And what can we learn from this? On the Dutch Birding forum, some even claimed the webbing wasn't necessarily at all to be certain about the ID of this bird, while in hindsight, it turned out that the absence of webbing was exactly what disproved the identification as semi-palmated sandpiper. I don't think you can give a single clear answer. Personally, there were many things that kept me doubting for a long time. But once I thought I saw webbing in my own footage, it seemed obvious to me, and I dismissed all the other differences as variation within a species I wasn't familiar with. The problem, of course, was that this bird was always at quite a distance. Using Google Maps, I estimated it around 250 meters, which is a serious distance for such a small bird. That makes it difficult to judge individual feathers. Only in good light and with proper equipment were the buffy colors visible, but often the birds just looked entirely grey. At such a distance, estimating the size also proved tricky. The bird could be compared with little stints, sanderlings, dunlings, Culus sandpipers, as well as ringed plovers. From the book, you know a semi-palmated sandpiper is larger than a little stint, but many birders in the Netherlands may never have seen one, or perhaps only one or twice long ago. So the question remains, how big should such a bird actually look? This particular bird sometimes did appear a bit heavier than most little stints. But then again, I also saw another little stint in the same flock that looked even heavier. And then there's the almost necklace jizz, something semi-palmated sandpipers are known for, a feature they also share with the western sandpiper, another very rare species from North America, and that you could see from time to time in this bird as well. The somewhat messy looking mantle with a few feathers showing large black centers, along with winter plumage feathers with what seemed like thin sharp streaks, all look quite good for semi-palmated sandpiper at that distance. In my experience, greyish little stints often look a bit neater, and I don't mean the fully winter plumage birds, but rather the adult summer birds in moult. This bird also showed the clearest neckband of all the little stints present there, another good feature for semi-palmated sandpiper. They often also have arrow-shaped streaking that continues towards the flanks, but at that distance that was impossible to judge. Finally, the wing formula also seemed to fit, a short primary projection and a slight tail projection, meaning the primaries only extended a short distance beyond the longest tertial, and the wing tips ended before the tip of the tail. By contrast, a species like white-rumped sandpiper has a much longer projection, with wingtips extending far beyond the tail. The bird in the Oostvaardersplassen, however, seemed to show a small tail projection, whereas in little stint the wingtips should fall level with the tail. In summary, at certain moments, this bird showed all the features you'd expect from a semi-palmated sandpiper, from a good jizz to good plumage features, and yet we collectively, with only a few exceptions, were not critical enough. A large part of the observers may not even have known what to look for or how to recognize a semi-palmated sandpiper, and instead relied on the opinions of more experienced birders. And honestly, that's entirely understandable. To know every species in detail requires many years, perhaps decades of experience. Until then, there's nothing wrong with learning from more experienced birders. But when the vast majority simply follows the lead of a few experienced individuals, it's easy to fall into a tunnel. We must always keep in mind that a bird should show all the key features and not just some. The missing clear cap, the rather marginal breastband, the buffy tones in the neck and nape, the warm edges to the tertials, the jizz that wasn't always as bulky as expected, and the size, which wasn't always convincingly larger than little stint. All of these should have been enough clues that this was, in fact, a little stint. That said, you might think I'm now saying, Arjan, you made a blunder. Think 3 times before reporting something next time. But on the contrary, to pick out such a tricky bird at that distance is something only very few birders can do, and to have the courage to immediately put it forward as something interesting is praiseworthy. We've had enough occasions where a mega slipped through our fingers because only days later, I think of the bobolink, or even years later, I think of the Eleonora's falcon, it turned out from photos to have been something much rarer. As a collective, perhaps we temporarily failed here, and I was part of that, by claiming with too much certainty that I had the webbing on film. But Arjan did everything right, and deserves a big applause. May many follow his example, and Arjan will no doubt soon turn up another big rarity. At this point, the video would normally be wrapping up, but if you made it this far, there's another twist. For this video, I first wrote out the whole story, and only afterwards looked for the most fitting clips. Since the bird had already been unmasked as a little stint, I hadn't actually rewatched the footage until I started editing this video. And now I realize I never filmed Arjan's actual bird at all. Not on Friday and not on Sunday. The photos Arjan took, the ones that allowed him to finally confirm the ID as Little Stint, clearly show a different bird than the one I filmed on Sunday. That can be seen in the coverts and the mantle feathers. They simply don't match. So how did this happen? I was influenced by a combination of factors. On Friday, I couldn't find the bird in the field. Only when reviewing my videos later, I noticed a striking bird. Arjan confirmed that this was indeed his bird, but in hindsight, it seems that wasn't the case. From that moment on, I no longer found it strange that the presumed semi-palmated sandpiper could show a buffy neck. Then, in one of the first Saturday morning reports, it was noted that the bird had warm edges to the tertials. And thirdly, when I arrived on Sunday morning, it was just after Arjan had relocated his bird and explained to everyone in the hide where it was. Others were still pointing it out, and I immediately thought I had Arjan's bird on film. I let the camera run, while also keeping an eye on my son. The bird I filmed seemed, based on mantle feathers, to match the one from Friday evening, and when I thought I saw webbing on that bird, I stopped being critical. I even sent Arjan a zoomed-in clip, to which he replied, "Whoa, beautiful." Again, no red flag. So while I was right in the very beginning with the first forwarded photos, in the end I was fooled in several different ways. There are plenty of excuses I could come up with, but for me this is simply a good lesson for next time. And once again, it confirms how valuable filming is, and then calmly reviewing everything later while making a video. Let me know what you thought of this video in a comment below, and I'll see you next time, either in another rarities update or in a new year list video. Until then.